Now, if you were around in the 1990s, you're probably familiar with the TV show Tales from the Crypt. Now, that show was based on a run of old comic books from EC Comics, also called Tales from the Crypt. But that show was not actually the first adaptation of those comic books. You see, way earlier than that, Milton Schabotsky, who was one of the founders and producers of Amicus Productions, was a huge fan of these comic books and bought the rights. And it made perfect sense for him to do that because his company, Amicus, had been making a bunch of horror anthology films. And then in 1972, they would make their fourth horror anthology film, Tales from the Crypt. What's going on, my friends? Welcome again to the Cobwebs channel. My name is Daniel, and it's time for the fourth video in my series on all of the Amicus horror anthology films. But before we jump into it, what do you think of Tales from the Crypt? Let me know down in the comments below. Is it your favorite? I think this movie is the fan favorite of all of the Amicus horror anthologies, although I personally made a case for The House That Dripped Blood in the last video. If you missed that review, check it out after you watch this one. Now, right at the start of the film, we hear the best music that we've heard in any of these movies so far. The Tales from the Crypt theme is so awesome from Douglas Gamely, just starts the movie on such a high, and we go into the wraparound. And here we follow 5 strangers who are mysteriously, randomly taking a tour of old catacombs in the English countryside. They walk into a very spooky room and are greeted by the Crypt Keeper. Yes, the run of EC Comics Tales from the Crypt were hosted by the Crypt Keeper. And if you watch the show from the 1990s, you're familiar with this guy. He is iconic. His voice, his laugh, the puppetry.
Now that's entertainment.
So great, but you're not getting anything like that in this movie. Instead, you're getting Sir Ralph Richardson, and legendary actor of this time period, British actor, and he's wearing monk robes, but they don't really do anything else to make him, well, spooky like a Crypt Keeper would be. And I kind of understand why they did this. If they did it, it would let on right at the start that there's something supernatural going on, as if we had any doubts, but hey, it's okay. He's pretty good, and he gives a good performance for sure. He suggests that he's going to tell the future of all these people, and very quickly we jump into the first segment, which is called All Through the House. Now, this one stars Joan Collins. Now, she's been in a lot of stuff, but I will always primarily know her as Edith Keeler from my personal favorite episode of Star Trek The Original Series, City on the Edge of Forever. But here, we're first following an older man, and we realize it's Christmas time. Yes, this is a Christmas segment with actually pretty great Christmas atmosphere. You've got a tree, you've got decorations around, you've got very reverent, traditional Christmas music. It's actually going to play all throughout this entire segment. But then the old guy is murdered, and we realize Joan Collins herself did it. Yes, right at the start, our main character has murdered her much older husband. Man, I love this effect of the blood hitting the newspaper before we actually see what happened. It's just pitch perfect direction from Freddie Francis. Yes, Freddie Francis came back to direct this one after he took the last film off, even though he did the first 2 Amicus anthology films, but good to have him back here. We even realize that she has a kid. So yes, while her kid is sleeping upstairs on Christmas Eve, she has just murdered the kid's dad for the insurance money.
Psycho killer, qu'est-ce que c'est?
And this sets a precedent that we're going to see a lot in this movie, where the main character of all these segments is really horrible. Like, none of the other Amicus anthology segments we've seen so far have protagonists this bad. Horror anthologies do this a lot. Very unlikable main characters who end up getting their just desserts at the end. Tales from the Crypt is one of the most hardcore examples of that. But cutting into the radio where we're listening to Christmas music, we hear that there is an escaped homicidal maniac that is on the loose, and he shows up at their house dressed up as Santa Claus. And I just got to give a ton of respect to this segment right here for just how influential it is. I mean, Christmas horror, there was not that many movies like that by 1972. Now, in Britain, there had always been a little bit of spookiness around Christmas traditions, like with A Christmas Carol with the 3 ghosts and stuff like that. But this is Christmas horror in the vein of Black Christmas, of Silent Night, Deadly Night. And this guy is really menacing, really creepy. I love that they don't do anything with the performance to try to make him kookier or spookier or anything like that. He's just this very cold, dead-eyed old man who wants to to murder you. The fact that she killed her husband right before this is so perfect because she can't call the police now that this old man is trying to break into her house. And the setting of the Christmas, the tree, the traditional reverent music is so perfect, set behind all of this bloody murder. This segment is awesome. It's one of the best things Amicus ever did. Segment number 2 is called Reflection of Death, and it stars Ian Hendry, who I primarily know as one of the male leads of Theater of Blood with Vincent Price. And here he's a man who's about to go on a business trip. He kisses his kids goodnight, kisses his wife goodbye, but we realize something is going on with this guy as he seems more like he's saying goodbye. At that point, instead of going on a business trip, he goes to meet up with his mistress and makes it clear they are running away together and he is never coming back. Yes, again, we're following the trend of having horrible protagonists. And look, when Joan Collins killed her husband, yes, murder is bad. The Cobwebs channel says murder is bad.
And knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe!
But I don't know a lot about that situation. I mean, that husband could be horrible. He's clearly a lot older than her. Maybe she didn't really know what she was doing when she got married to him. I don't know the situation. I don't know. But I just know I feel a lot more disgust and anger towards Ian Hendry in this segment than even Joan Collins in the first one. I mean, kissing his kids goodnight and knowing he is never coming back, he's never going to see them again. It's awful. And right at that point, this movie has got me in terms of an emotional hook. I'm in because I hate this guy and I want to see something happen. Now him and his mistress, who's played by Angela Grant, are driving away and they get in a horrible car accident. And from there, we figure out maybe somebody died in this car accident, and we get a POV shot of Ian Hendry walking out of the crash and trying to find somebody, trying to figure out what's going on. And from here, I'm sure you can figure it out. This is a zombie segment, a POV zombie segment, before the VHS franchise would do that in the 2010s just recently. And this segment is just okay, honestly. It's pretty easily the weakest of the segments. It's got me on a kind of emotional hook at the start. It just doesn't do a lot with that. It's pretty short, ends pretty quickly, and because it never overstays its welcome, I'm fine with it. Now we roll right into segment 3, which is called Poetic Justice. I mean, perfect. I've been talking about how Amicus Anthology segments are usually about poetic justice. That's exactly what we get here. The lead of this one, I guess basically the lead is Robin Phillips, but the lead of the segment is really Peter Cushing. Yes, you've been wondering, is Peter Cushing going to show up in this movie? Of course he is. And here he is as actually an old man. He was originally offered the lead in segment number 4, which we're about to get to, but he wanted to play this part to do something different. Just the last year, he played a pretty dashing character in House of the Drip Blood, and he changes his performance so much in Tales from the Crypt. He very much just transforms himself through his performance and a little bit of makeup into a feeble old man, but a kind old man, a garbage collector who finds toys in the garbage, repairs them, fixes them up, gives them away to the neighborhood children. He's a dog lover. He lives with his dogs while he mourns the passing of his wife named Helen. Yes, they named his wife Helen after Peter Cushing's real late wife, Helen. That's just the kind of thing that's going to get you right in the heart right there. It's a pretty beautiful touch, honestly. But Robin Phillips is a rich, privileged, spoiled brat who lives across the street with his rich dad and is just sick of this old man because his house isn't nice and he's a garbage collector and just feels like it's an eyesore to the neighborhood right across from his rich house. But Peter Cushing owns the house outright. They can't kick him out. He won't sell it to them. So he just decides to tear down Peter Cushing piece by piece, make his life more and more miserable until he moves out of the house or dies. Of all the segments, this one is the most infuriating, much because Peter Cushing is so lovable. I'm so glad he took this part as opposed to the businessman role in the 4th segment that we're about to talk to. That wouldn't have quite used his talents like this one does. Peter Cushing, no matter who he's playing, you just always feel like he's lovable. And this is one of his most lovable characters. And watching them take away his job, take away his dogs, rip up a garden, which is like so unforgivable to me. Like, how dare you? And I love where the segment ends up going. And we're going to get spoilery with this segment in particular. There's just no way to talk about this segment without talking about the ending. But I'm assuming if you have any interest in Amicus anthologies, you've probably at least seen Tales from the Crypt. Peter Cushing's character takes his own life, but when they discover that, they find a lot of black magic stuff all around. And I love this because it suggests that he's not just going to come back from the dead just because it's a horror movie and somebody's got to come back from the dead, but he planned this, and our lovable, sweet old man dabbled in some witchcraft to get revenge for what these people did to him. I think that's such a smart touch. They didn't have to do that. They could have made it more basic, but they made it a little bit more interesting. And when Peter Cushing does come back from the dead, this is ultimately another zombie segment. It's phenomenal. One of my favorite things that you can ever show me in a movie is a zombie coming out of the grave, a hand bursting out of the dirt. That's just one of my favorite visuals of all time. Like, that's why I'm a horror fan, so I can watch zombies crawl out of graves. And another great image is when we see Peter Cushing coming into this spoiled guy's house, the image of the darkness of just him shambling out. And when we finally see zombie Cushing, the makeup is like shockingly good. I would say of all Amicus movies and even all Hammer movies, just British horror from this period, this is some of the best makeup you're going to see in any of those movies. It just looks so good. This segment is spectacular. It's also a Valentine's Day segment. So in this movie, it goes from December to February, I guess. We get Christmas and Valentine's. So it's just a great holiday movie all around. Segment number 4 is called Wish You Were Here, and starring Richard Greene, who I know as Robin Hood from Hammer's Robin Hood film, Sword of Sherwood Forest. And he was also in the Basil Rathbone Hound of the Baskervilles too. So he's done a lot of movies that I like. And here he is as a businessman. This is who Peter Cushing was originally offered the role of. And of all the leads of these segments, he is by far, and I mean by far, the least horrible lead. Like, we don't even really see him do anything bad. He suggests that he's kind of a ruthless businessman, but we don't really see any of that ruthlessness. At the start, he made an investment that ended up going badly, and he realizes he has to sell all of his stuff. He's a collector, much like I'm a Blu-ray collector. We're very much the same. He's got to sell all of his stuff in order to pay off his debts, and he discovers that he's got this one collectible in his house that is basically a monkey's paw. It is an artifact that allows him 3 wishes. And this segment is very meta about the monkey's paw story. They constantly talk about that story and they're like, in the classic story it went like this, so maybe we should try it like this. There's just a lot of meta stuff like that that I think is pretty fun. And wouldn't you know it, the wishes just start going badly. This is another one I have to get into spoilers about because the ending is so awesome. It's just gotta be discussed. So Richard Greene actually very quickly dies in this segment. He's the lead, but he dies like halfway through. And his wife wishes him back alive. And there's this great realization that his dead body has already been embalmed. And now he wakes up alive with embalming fluid flowing through him that can't kill him because his wife wished him alive. That's just putting him in torturous pain. His wife then tries to kill him, chop him up, but every piece of him is alive. We get the hand from the first Amicus anthology, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, back making a cameo in this. It's super gruesome, super dark. This segment is kind of funny, but super dark and disturbing, and it's actually got some pretty gross gore. It ends with a bang. Now we go into the 5th and final segment, Blind Alleys, and at this point, I've got to address the structure, the unusual structure of this movie. Now, up to this point, I'm feeling like this movie is just flying by. Like, the pacing is just off the charts. It is just zipping through the runtime. And you realize that this movie went through 4 segments in just a little over an hour. Now, for contrast, the last anthology film we talked about, The House That Dripped Blood, went through 4 segments in an hour and 42 minutes. So the first 4 segments are really quick. You just zip on through them. And now we're going to spend pretty much the final half hour all on the 5th and final segment, but it ends up paying off. Now, this one is starring Nigel Patrick, who is an ex-army officer who has taken charge as the superintendent of a home for blind men. It becomes clear that he is not going to be a kind and benevolent superintendent. Instead, he tries to run this like the army and very much use the position to live in luxury himself, all while cutting costs, cutting food, heating, all kinds of comforts for the actual blind men that have to live there. And now this guy is up with the worst of the worst in terms of all of these awful protagonists that we've been talking about. You hate him so much. Now, Patrick McGee co-stars in this segment as basically the leader of all of these blind men, the one who is always tasked to go speak for all of them. And he's constantly fighting with this superintendent, trying to get them more heat, more food, more blankets. And this guy will not budge. And towards the end of the segment, we get all of them taking revenge out on him. And this kind of turns into I don't know, a Saw movie, a House of Torture kind of a thing, where all of these blind guys, when working together, are able to imprison this guy in a house of torture that they made themselves. It's honestly pretty awesome. This segment actually took a little bit to grow on me. I've seen this movie several times, and I think because this segment is so much longer than all the rest of them, I used to really feel that length and felt like this one dragged a little bit. But I don't know, when I was rewatching this movie to make this video, it just really clicked for me, and I just loved it all the way through. I didn't mind that it's so much longer. Like I said, the structure of the movie is a little bit odd, but it pays off because Blind Alleys is a great segment with a really disturbing finale. So let's go ahead and rate all these segments. Now, all through the house, I'm going to give an 8. This is a fantastic anthology segment. Like I said, it's very influential. It's an early slasher. Joan Collins definitely does a great job in the lead. I think the only reason I'm knocking it a little bit is there's very little emotional hook here, very little character and dialogue work here, but as an almost silent slasher experience with great atmosphere, it's fantastic. Now, Reflection of Death, I'm possibly going to be generous, and I'm going to give a 6. I think much because it doesn't overstay its welcome. It has a good emotional hook at the start, and it's got, a fairly okay stinger at the end. A lot of the segment's fairly boring, but I do think it's good enough, and it's nice and short. It's totally fine. Poetic Justice is the second segment in this whole series so far that I'm going to give a perfect 10. This is a perfect horror anthology segment, up with the best of the best in the entire genre. Peter Cushing's performance is incredible. The emotional hook is at its best. This is the one you care about the most by far. It's got incredible horror imagery at the end when it comes to makeup and atmosphere and graveyards. This is perfect. 10 out of 10. Wish You Were Here gets a 7. I like it. It's good. It's definitely better than just okay. I like the finale that's honestly pretty disturbing, the gore of it, but the whole thing just feels a little bit more slight, short, not a lot of depth to it, but a good time. Blind Alleys gets an 8. This is one of the great segments. Patrick McGee's performance in particular is fantastic here. I think I'm just knocking it a little bit because it is the longest one, and you do feel it sometimes, and it's not part of like one of my favorite horror subgenres. A little bit more of a thriller, a torture sort of a thing, when I would rather watch zombies crawl out of graves, to be honest, but this is really good, and it's got some really great depth to it. The wraparound is going to get a 7. It's got some good atmosphere to it. Ralph Richardson isn't exactly the Crypt Keeper I would prefer, but he's good, and it's got a really good ending. Overall, I'm going to give Tales from the Crypt an 8 out of 10. I absolutely love this movie, but if you want to hear more of my thoughts on Amicus Anthology films, click right over here for my House That Dripped Blood review. I'm also going to put the playlist of all of my Amicus reviews right down here so you can check it out. Give a like and a subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I will see you next time.